You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series that syndicates for the A-List Online, and my name is Andrew Mackay-Smith. Thanks for joining me. The interview subject I've got coming up for you. Wow, the big ones keep on coming through because this fella's in Pallbearer, and they've got a new album out called Forgotten Days. The bassist is who you'll be hearing from, Joseph D. Rowland. I truly enjoyed this discussion, I must say. It's one of my favourite things to connect with a musician who has an international audience, and it's fair to say Pallbearer. They're certainly making a mark at this point in time. We talk about the album, of course, but regular listeners, you know me. We talk about a whole bunch of other stuff as well. Some pretty deep and meaningful subjects, I must say. This is one of my favourite interviews of the year thus far. I don't say shit like that unless I mean it, and I mean it. So here he is, Joseph D. Rowland from Pallbearer. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yeah.
Mate, what is going on behind you there? That is not what I expected to see, so share with me. What's happening?
This is a modular synthesizer in the background.
Nice. Was that on the album?
There is some modular synth on the album, but not this particular setup. So
I'm a
this
musician.
is just my home setup. So
Look, forgive my ignorance, but does that use tubes or is that all solid state?
In this case, it doesn't really. That doesn't apply. It's a totally different sort of technology, I guess. But I mean, there are some, like, these are all like modules in here. There are some that use a tube in the like signal path, but I don't have any. So,
mate, that's very impressive. I love the look of it. You know, I love the hat too. By the way, 10 out of 10 for the hat. I had a chat to Trevor about it 18 months ago, so I just love that band so much.
Man, yeah, we toured with them a few years ago, and they were definitely a lot of fun.
That would have been a killer tour to see you both together. It just would have been a wall of sound.
It was a trip for sure.
And is that a keyboard up there and just behind, next to the synth?
Oh, back here?
Yeah.
It's a drum machine.
Drum machine. Okay.
I actually if you'll let me disconnect this for a second.
Sure.
I can show you. There's quite a bit more in here.
That's unreal.
This is like my home studio setup. It's like basically like all synth stuff, and then a few guitar things. But
yeah, that's killer. So you must write a lot of stuff on keys or on synth?
Yeah. I mean, in addition to the like instances that it like works its way into Pallbearer, I also like am a Tallow disco producer. So
nice. Is that right?
I do like other like
Giorgio Moroder.
I do other. Yeah, totally. That style of stuff.
Nice. All right. So do you get into synth wave as well?
Man, I'm one of those people who's like, I'm like too much of a snob to like get into the the like synthwave stuff. I think I've heard some stuff that I think is pretty cool, but in general, like a lot of it like feels, it's the same sort of feeling for me as like when like horror or sci-fi movies come out now that are supposed to like seem like a B movie.
Sure.
But it's too self-aware to actually be like genuinely bad but good, in the same way that like a lot of like 70s and 80s movies were, where like they just had no conception of the fact that they were making a terrible movie, but it's still like this like kind of like joyously innocent thing where like it's a train wreck of a movie, but you love it anyway. That's the way I feel about the synthwave stuff. It's like too self-aware. It's like trying a little too hard to be like this retro kind of thing, and it just comes off. There's like something like disingenuous about it to me. But I'm also like an enormous nerd about this shit. So
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love to. You're a purist. I love that. I mean, you can hear that with what you're doing with Pallbearer, but you're a purist in your approach to music in general, and that makes complete sense why you've got the modular synth there behind you. Because look, I've loved Giorgio's music for so long myself, and you're the first metal, you know, when I say metal musician, rock metal musician, what have you, that's really appreciated it, because I love disco and funk as well, as much as I
Yeah,
love metal. I love it, and
that's amazing.
yeah, it's incredible. You know, bands like Chic and Brothers Johnson. You're a bassist, so you get this
Yeah,
stuff. I mean, to be honest,
absolutely.
man, I listen to that more than I listen to metal. It's just the stuff, especially, you know, if I'm having a scotch or something like that, mate. Give me two or three of them, man, and Brothers Johnson come on in the background, and I'm not one of those people that's jealous or envious, man. I just admire the way that they can play.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, they like Chic had a like better studio band than like any metal band ever. Probably and it like definitely like a lot more inventive.
Well, Nile
I'm
Rodgers.
not a huge like yeah not I mean I actually had an opportunity to see Nile Rodgers do a keynote a few years ago where he talked about uh, putting together that band and like how I mean they essentially like revolutionized the music industry. So
I absolutely agree. Thank you for saying that. Thank you so much for saying that, because I've tried to connect with. I've done almost. It's over 600 interviews now, and the few times that I've brought it up, and it's not because people are ignorant. They just don't know. If you don't know, you don't know. You know, it's like,
yeah,
yeah, asking somebody if they've tried some of the fabulous dishes from Tuscany, and they say, "Well, no, I haven't." It's just that they don't know the riches that await, if you like. And for me, Nile Rodgers and Bernard Edwards being a bassist, you know, he's pretty much the alpha and the omega alongside of Larry Graham.
hmm
But Madonna owes her career to Nile Rodgers and Bernard.
absolutely.
And because of Madonna's supreme influence, just about all this music that came after her is influenced by her. So if it wasn't for Nile and Bernard, there'd be no Madonna. Therefore, music would sound different. And that's always been my point.
Yeah,
Of, like, you still have music, but it wouldn't sound the way it does now.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean it would. That's sort of like this like insane like almost like butterfly effect sort of thing where like
Absolutely.
if they hadn't done what they did like if you think about all the like pop music that's come since, I mean, obviously like Lady Gaga was like the newest iteration of Madonna almost, where it was
Absolutely.
like this like artiste pop star, somebody who was like aspiring to do something like bigger than just be like a commercial success. But there was this whole other like just thinking about like all of the things that never would have been the same. Like it's
Absolutely.
like
Yeah. I
this
mean,
indelible footprint
I was
on the
listening
industry.
to
So
just randomly, random thing I did this morning. Do you remember that Power Station, the band that Niall and Bernard helped out a lot? You know, with Robert Palmer and the guys from Duran Duran, and Tony Thompson from Chic was in it as well.
I
Do you, did
I'm
you
not
check
as
that out?
familiar with that. I think I know of like one song from them, but
Bang a
I'm
Gong. You
not
know
that
Bang a
familiar.
Gong, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
yeah, I definitely know that.
well, I watched their appearance on Miami Vice on YouTube this morning. Although Robert Palmer wasn't singing, it was some other interloper whose name I can't remember. I shouldn't say interloper, I don't know. Robert obviously was not in the band at that point, but it was just after they'd released. I mean, Miami Vice is peak 1985, 1986, which is, I think, when that album came out. I love that album as a kid, and still to this day as an adult, the two albums that they bought out. And there's that other famous video. It's hilarious because Bernard's showing, I can't remember the name of the Duran Duran bass player who's the bassist in Power Station, but showing him how to do some slapping and some funk stuff. And then, with all due respect to Duran Duran bass player, he can't do it. So he
Yeah,
does this
yeah,
chucking
like,
sort of a thing with his pick. It was like, dude, why didn't Bernard just play on the album? Because it just would have. It was. I mean, with Tony Thompson in there, those two were like a
yeah,
hand in a glove.
yeah. I'll have to check that out. I feel like I'm missing out.
It's good stuff. I tell you why. It's kind of like the hard rock version of Chic. That's the best way I can describe it. So it's still got that Titanic groove. They've not lost that. You can't lose that if you've got Tony and Bernard and Niall looking after things. But then you can hear the genesis of the way out. One of our favourite bands in Australia, In Excess, because of course Niall had a lot to do with them. You know, they were a great pub rock band in Australia. They did a lot of pub stuff, a bit like Midnight Oil and Cold Chisel and all this stuff. But then they went to New
Yeah,
York, I think it was, and they met Niall. And Niall just gave them this funk, and of course they became, you know, this band that headlined Wembley and all sorts of stadiums all over the world. So, yeah, man, just to round out the point, man, it's Nile Rodgers all the way and Bernard Edwards all the way for me, man. I talk about a lot of this stuff with people, but I feel like people's eyes glaze over. But I think there's a lack of awareness of their history and how important they have been to music, and especially it's even recent too, man. I mean, they helped Daft Punk reinvent themselves.
Yeah, no, I was actually about to say. I mean, like their Daft Punk's entire sound and like influence on house music was clearly just like them essentially like remixing stuff to sound like Chic, pretty much,
Absolutely.
or like that style. So all the French house stuff.
Dude, you
yeah,
get
they
it.
just
Jesus.
did the last record that they did was just essentially like was it just produced by Nile Rodgers?
Oh, I think
And
it was the guys.
it had
but
like
I think Banglatier and the other fella did it. But I mean, to your exact point, I mean, you can hear Niall's influence and fingerprint all over it. Like, Lose Yourself to Dance with Pharrell singing on it. Man, how many times have I had a few too many beverages and just played that back to back, just constantly, just with I've got my bass out, I've got a 5-string bass, and you know who played bass with that? Nathan East, one of the greatest bass players of all time. Nathan East, who did Footloose, and
yeah.
I play in covers, so I have to play a lot of this stuff, and I've tried to play Footloose note for note, but I can't. I'm not. I don't think I lack too much in a technical proficient sense, but to sit down and get every little nuance of that right, it's just too much, to be honest with you. Plus, there's the way that he does things. You get your fingers are this way and this way when you're on stage and you're sweating, and you get it. You're a musician. You perform many sweaty gigs. Your fingers,
like classic instance of the tone is in the fingers thing, where like you can
right hand
like,
as well. Yeah,
it really is like all up to the musician to. I mean, and then in that sort of case where it's just like, even if you can play every single note right, it's still never going to be exactly the same.
The timing is going to be slightly out. If it can be like a quarter note behind where he hits it, so you can never quite get it. You can sort of capture the energy, I think, but you'll never get it exactly right. But Nathan East's bass line on "Lose Yourself to Dance," man, I've listened to that so many times, and I've had the headphones on, and I've just gone, okay, and he's doing things that I still don't understand. Like, I can hear what he's doing, but I've tried to recreate it, and it's definitely not a synth bass. It's definitely him playing, but I don't. It's like I don't know the name of Rihanna's bass player. Tremendous bass player. There's a couple of videos like this. His Pepsi Smash video on YouTube. Just watching him do his stuff, and it's just this impeccable. He's so deep in the pocket that if you remove the bass from her playing live, it doesn't sound like Rihanna anymore. That's how important the bass is.
There's one thing too that I know, like, I don't know if you're a fan of like Leland Sklar at all.
Yeah, big time, yeah.
That I know that like a lot of this, I heard this from like him giving this like lengthy description about like how a lot of stuff was done back then, but they would like essentially set up an envelope follower on a modular synth like this that would trigger a bass line that like matched like on a synth that matched the playing exactly. So it like would add this additional like 1 or 2 octave foundation even lower than what's being played on the stringed instrument itself.
Interesting.
And then they would mix that like way down low in the mix, but it just provided this like extra like bottom end on there.
I didn't know that. So there you go. So have you tried anything like that with what you're doing?
I mean, I've done my own experiments myself, like here in my home studio, but I've never really tried to, like, with Pallbearer, the few times that I've like been interested in maybe trying to incorporate something like that, it just wasn't that practical.
Sure.
Especially not in a live setting. I would end up having to have like a separate line going to the board, and like maybe even like an extra like cab on stage. And at that point, like there's like, as we're not the kind of band who can just indulge like whatever we want in terms of, like there has to be some sort of like economy happening of like, all right, my touring pedal board needs to be this big because we have to take like 10 flights on this tour, and like I can't afford to necessarily like bring 2 pedal boards on the on the flight. If I wanted to break it up or something, like that would be an extra $300 for the flight or something. So we, like a lot of times, even though we might have ideas of doing stuff that, the legendary players that we idolize, like we're able to do because they were playing in arenas. Like we have to sort of like figure out how to accomplish something. Maybe if we do end up trying to do something that's akin to it, it's like our own way of doing it that's somehow like, I guess like cobbling it together into something that works. I don't know.
So, but you are a very competent musician, clearly, and you get the history of music in general. What we're talking about, you've understood everything that I've spoken about, and you've certainly got your own opinions on things as well. So, do you see the band potentially morphing into like a John Paul Jones setup, with Kashmir, where you're doing the keyboards and you take the band in that direction?
We've done that already. Some on tour, like we've had situations where we have had keys on stage, and some sections of songs will be like there will be no bass and there will be keys, or sometimes like Brett, who sings and plays guitar, and Pallbearer
Sure.
like plays keys. Once again, it's just kind of a situation of like, thus far we've never had a situation where we've had like an extra like touring member or something. We've been talking about maybe having someone that like plays live with us whenever that's a thing again.
Yeah.
Who's just like a session member essentially, who would be able to kind of cover the keys, or like if for instance like I wanted to switch to playing keys, like that person could play bass while I'm on keys, or just whatever. They would be able to kind of like fill a role that like in the studio we're able to pull off like relatively easily, because we do have the like the knowledge base and like at least like enough of the skill to be able to do it. But at least I think. But
no, definitely got
just,
the skills. Yeah, the band's definitely very
like
skillful. You can hear that.
I think that one thing that a lot of people forget about in the like touring world of bands is there's just not like unlimited money to like throw at like whatever, like flights of fancy. As much as like we would like the show to be like the most like breathtaking and just like a fully like jaw-dropping experience on like every front, but we have to like figure out like what we can do, make sure everybody still like has a home to come home to when the tour's over.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like it was back in the day where like a relatively like left field like heavy band is able to just like do whatever we want. So we all, I think that we don't let it color the like creative process too much. We also like try not to like overextend ourselves either. Like when we're writing and recording music, we don't want to make something that's impossible for us to do in the live setting.
Yeah.
So far, everything that we've done, we've kind of like been like, all right, well, here's our limit of like how much we can do on this, which is why like I think to some degree like why we've never like fully indulged the synth stuff to the max in any of the Pallbearer songs, just because it would be a completely different paradigm to try to introduce that in a like a genuine way live.
Yeah. Have you thought about doing? I don't know whether you saw, but Lamb of God did this live thing a week or two ago, and I think they're a riff-heavy band as you guys are too, but I think they're pretty meat and potatoes from the perspective that if you put keyboards or anything else in there, it would sound naff, to be honest with you. But they did I think Suicide Silence did the same thing, where they this COVID period you can't perform live, so you got to perform live somehow, and I guess it's over Zoom or private link or what have you. Have you guys thought of realising your ultimate vision sound-wise and doing it that way?
We've done some stuff remotely so far. We've actually been going back and redoing some of our back catalog as like fully synth versions of the songs. but in terms of like a live stream sort of thing, like Lamb of God or Suicide Silence or whatever, we've been discussing doing that, but the logistics of it are pretty difficult because I live like half the country away from everybody else. Like my home base is in New York City.
Oh shit!
Everybody
Okay.
else is in everybody else is in Arkansas, and just trying to make sure that if we do get together, that it can be done like safely and without like there being some like really extended like quarantine period or whatever, you know. And obviously, that's also going to be the same, not just for me, but for like whoever we get to do the sound engineering or like camera crew or whatever. It's like we just because it's already going to be, it's going to end up having to be like people coming from elsewhere to Little Rock, I assume, or maybe the other guys coming from Little Rock to another location. It's just a lot to like put together to figure out how to do it where like no one's health and well-being is being like, compromised in some way. So yeah, we want to do it like really badly, but it's just it hasn't been in the cards for us yet. We're still trying to kind of figure out the best opportunity for it.
Can you even leave New York State? Like I know here in Victoria, people can't get into New South Wales or up here where I'm in Queensland. So can you get to Arkansas if you wanted to?
I could get to Arkansas. I'm still extremely hesitant to fly. I've only been out of New York City once since March.
Yeah.
And it was in a car, and you can definitely travel by car out of New York and into New York, no problem. But it would be a over 20-hour drive to get to Little Rock, and I also like don't have a driver's license, so it just I would need someone else to
to
get me. I don't know. It's just like it's a whole stupid thing. So sometime we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Oh, look, we need to figure it out because I know the WHO have come out recently and said effectively herd immunity is the way to go. So all these lockdowns need to end sooner rather than later. And that's, I mean, you know, they've been criticised fairly or unfairly depending on your perspective. I suppose it all is a political thing these days. You know, people tend to take perspectives along political lines, but they've been accused of being funded by China and the like. But it's only in the last few days that they've come out and said, hang on a sec, we've now got to open up borders and people have got to start intermingling, because I don't think we've got an absurd situation here in Victoria where they keep on cycling through these outbreaks and then they just go into these heavy lockdowns again, and people are getting fined for exercising, literally.
Wow.
You know, I think they're the toughest lockdowns in the world, actually, in Victoria or thereabouts. You know,
that's crazy. Yeah, I've heard about there being some pretty intense lockdowns because I have some friends who are in Sydney and in Melbourne, and they've mentioned that it's been
Melbourne. Sorry,
it's been more
Victoria, Melbourne.
More stringent than anything here. I don't know, man. For me, I have no background in science whatsoever, but I have been very disappointed that, at least in the U.S., that there has been such a strong pushback against wearing masks, which is like, to me, like, if it's being suggested by scientists that you should wear a mask, like, why the fuck wouldn't you wear a mask? Like, I just don't understand, like, why there's been this whole it has become a political stance.
Yeah, it's partisan. Yeah.
Essentially be displaying full disrespect for everybody else. So I'm just kind of like, and it is, I would say it's like caused quite a bit of bitterness for me, because I'm like, I can't go back to doing the one thing that I feel like I've been like put here on this planet to do, because these like fucking douchebags are like basically like just being like, fuck everybody. I'm just gonna like for freedom. I'm gonna like, I don't know. It pisses me off to no extent, pretty much, because I just want to get back to being able to play music, and you know, right now as awesome as it's been to have the time at home for so long, I've started to realize, I think, that part of my like creative process at least has like grown to include the like departure and return to my creative space. It's like what helps like kind of like foster the creative process, I think. Being able to like leave and not be able to create and then come back and then
I'm with
it
you,
all
mate.
comes
Don't
like
worry.
pouring out. So
Yeah, we don't have
yeah.
lockdowns here in Queensland, but I mean, I can't really do anything. I'm a writer and journo, so uh, we've been working from home, and I'm writing a book at the
Yeah.
moment, but we can't really travel, or we can travel within the state, no problem, but just going over the border just to do something as basic as getting a fucking cup of coffee at Nimbin, which I like doing. Just 150 kilometres down the road. It's just a pop, skip, and a jump away. But I
Wow.
might be subject to 2 weeks worth of quarantine, which I can't. I've got kids, man. I've got to take kids to
Yeah.
school, and I just can't
Yeah.
afford to risk it. Is what I'm saying. And
Of course. Yeah.
it's that situation where we just sort of feel where even if you aren't locked up, you feel like as though you've got these restrictions. And I understand what the reasoning is behind it, but I understand exactly what you're saying. Sorry, to your point there about the creative process. You know that because it was part of the way that we do things is by meeting, and especially I'm a musician too, as I've explained, and watching bands, man, just having a bevy and watching
Yeah.
bands, just fuck, man, not. We haven't played now in almost 12 months. My band.
Yeah.
Last time we played was in January. January 3rd or something like that. I don't know when it was, man. And it's just, this is the longest in my life, probably the same for you, since I became a musician back in 1992, that I haven't played live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I haven't played a live show since September of last year, which is definitely the longest.
Yeah.
In, yeah, it's close to 2 decades. So it's I don't know.
It's just
it's
weird.
definitely like wearing my like sanity down, I think.
Mate, let's talk about this album then, because look, I am a fan of you guys. I had a chat to Brett whenever the last album
Mm-hmm.
was released, so 2016 or 17, I think it was, and I was very impressed with that album, I must say. But I've only had this one for a week or so, ever since Nuclear Blast put it in the portal and we're able to download it and the like. So I haven't lived with it long enough, but my impression is that it may be a stronger Forgotten Days may be a stronger album than Heartless. Okay, now the reason I do is because I'm a huge Dio era Sabbath fan, and I don't know whether you've been given this feedback before, but I think you guys are the natural successor. Without trying, you are the natural successor to Mob Rules and the other album whose name escapes me at the moment, even though I've listened to it a million times and I can't remember it right
Heaven
now.
and Hell is the
Heaven
other
and
one.
Hell. Yeah, Mob Rules is probably just slightly more my favourite than the other one. That's why I can remember it. Sorry, but you know where I'm headed to, man. I think that the reason I say that is because you've managed to blend even more melody without sacrificing any of the heaviness. So, do you feel the same way about the band's progression?
I mean, for us, like it's always our like one of our like consummate pursuits to continue evolving from what we've done before. The last record, I think, for us was kind of like first and foremost like a challenge to ourselves to like take everything that we had done up to that point and really, really push the most progressive edges of it into like a place that was almost like beyond our grasp. Like we had to like get good enough to play that record almost.
Sure.
Like we were able to write it, but then there had to be this whole like catch up period where we would like be able to like legitimately like pull it off in a live setting. It was like this whole other like hurdle that we had to get over. And once we did that, we knew like the next step was that we wanted to make something a little leaner musically, like less like just absolute like balls to the wall, like constant like progression through songs. Because like a lot of the Heartless stuff, like there's hardly anything that repeats ever. So we wanted to like scale that back a little bit, a little less ornamental, and focus just on the melody and the muscle, kind of.
It's interesting you say that because one of the biggest. Oh, it's not even it's a left turn. It's not a U turn. But it's when Metallica went from and Justice to Black, and Black's an album that I still think is shit. To be honest with you, it's just my opinion. It's as a musician and as a fan, I can't do it. No, I couldn't really do it back in the day. God knows I've played Enter Sandman as much as I've played any other song in my life because playing covers, everybody wants to hear that as the second last song of the night. That and Smells Like Teen Spirit, which I would pay money to never have to play or listen to ever again, either of those cuts. But you guys didn't lose your identity in the process, though. Okay, and I think a lot of bands run that risk.
I mean, who's to say, like, who was, like, pushing the, like, creative process behind Metallica and Nirvana in those periods, like, when they went into, like, a more commercial space. For us, I mean, in spite of there being, like, shorter songs and, like, more hooks on this record, it wasn't like anybody was telling us that was something that we needed to do. There wasn't like a corporate machine behind the creative process on this. We just we kind of already did our And Justice for All, I think, when that was Heartless. And so this is not something that was like a discussion really, but we wanted to make a record that, like, not the Metallica comparison really, but since you brought that up, but when we were working on the record, we had a pretty vast amount of material that we had been working on, and then we were like, all right, let's figure out from this huge batch of stuff what works the best together, and how do we want to compartmentalize this? What is album 4 going to be? Which is at the time, for Forgotten Days was the title, or anything like that. We were just kind of narrowing down, which was new territory for us, because in the past we've never overwritten for a record.
Sure.
It's always just been we topped out at the songs that were on on the album, and there was never anything else. So this time we actually had the benefit of being able to be all right, we've written all of these songs. Let's figure out what works best in this to capture the mood we want, what we want to express in a live setting and in the record setting, and then develop that further into an even more refined piece. So this was months before we went into the studio. So we had the discussion of all right, we want to make something that's less of a shred exercise, almost something that's a little pulled back a little bit, but still the emotion is the strongest element there, and it's something that we feel when we perform it, that'll be the strongest thing that's put forward. It's it just thrives on that emotional visceral component. So that's where we ended up with what ended up being the record. We narrowed it down to that there were 8 songs that we felt that encapsulated this record, and then we further honed in on making it work even more together in that context. And then by November last year, we went into the studio.
November, I was going to ask that, so it was pre-COVID, yeah. Here's another question for you. I don't know why I've never asked this question before, but here goes. Does Marcus and the team at Nuclear, do they put any pressure, or do they sort of lay out any obligation for you to continue producing a sound in a certain vein, or do you just sort of hand in the album and say, here it is?
Nuclear Blast had literally zero input on what we did on this record. This was still absolutely to the millionth microscopic level our record, along with Randall Dunn, who produced the record. He also had some input in the studio, but I mean there was never any any discussion about like or pressure or anything. Like there was never any communication about what this like this record should or shouldn't be. It was, as has always been our like MO, like we make the record that we want to make.
You got to wonder with a label like, because I think other artists have alluded to it too, that they just, when they're done, they hand it in and Nuclear, Marcus, or whoever it might be goes, yeah, okay, that's all right. But you got to wonder if there's ever been like was it Metal Machine Music? Was that bloody thing that what's his name, Lou Reed did 40 years ago, 50 years ago or so now? If they handed in something like that, what they might say. I know you guys aren't silly and you wouldn't do that, but you got to think somebody somewhere is going to have thought, you know what, I'm going to fuck shit up. Here you go.
Oh, I'm sure that's probably happened. I mean, we definitely weren't like aiming to make a record that we thought like everyone would hate. So, we were still trying. I mean, like, of course, we wanted to make a record that we liked and that hopefully other people would like. So,
yeah. So why Randall? What was the attraction there?
So we over the course of time since Heartless came out, we had done a few singles.
Atlantis, I remember. Yeah.
Atlantis, Dropout, and then we also did a cover of Run Like Hell by Pink Floyd.
Nice.
And Randall mixed all of those. He didn't record them. He wasn't like in the studio with us when those were being tracked, but we like tracked them and then sent the sessions to him to mix over different periods in time, because Dropout and then the other, like Atlantis and Run Like Hell, were like over 2 different years. But so we had done that, and then we also and during that time, in addition to like his like professional input on that front, we just discussed with him kind of about like our philosophy as a band and like his philosophy as a producer, and felt like it would be a good fit to work together. So that was kind of like where the initial like spark came from, was doing those shows with Randall and kind of like seeing that we felt like we were like potentially like a good holistic match to work together, because like what he was putting forward on his creative end of things seemed to line up like pretty well with like what we would be looking for if we worked with a producer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, I hate to bring up Metallica again, but just the Bob Rock thing, he worked with them for 25 years or whatever it was. I don't know, whatever the period of time was 15 years, whatever. Do you think you'd ever see yourselves working with someone, whether it's Randall or what have you? You're fairly, you're not old, meaning that you're probably about my age, early 40s, thereabouts. You could conceivably be doing this. Metallica are in their late 50s these days for another 30 years or so. So would you be open to that as a strategy, or do you like the idea of working with different people and getting new ideas that way?
I like the idea of working with different people. I would like to work with Randall again, but I know even from his perspective, like he has a limit of the amount of times that he'll work with an artist, because he also like feels that like it can hamper the growth or I guess, it fosters a like level of like comfortability where like an artist can like get to, I don't know, like they know what the producer expects them to do. Sure. And they end up like not like pushing themselves as much as they would going into a situation where it was like more of like an unknown factor, I guess. So like I know that Randall also has like a ceiling that he limits himself to in terms of like how many times he'll work with a particular artist. So
yeah,
that said, I would definitely like to work with Randall again. I felt like his input on Forgotten Days definitely helped place it exactly like in the zone that we had been envisioning before going into the studio.
So what about the lyrical front then? Because I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong here, that you write the lyrics, or you at least co-write the lyrics. So did you address any themes specifically?
Yeah, in terms of co-writing, it's like it's an either or sort of situation. Like it's like the songs that Brett writes musically, he writes the lyrics for, and the songs that I write musically, I write the lyrics for. So on this record, the lyrics that I wrote are encircling the events that like transpired 10 years ago as of last year, because last year was the 10th anniversary of my mom passing away, and it was also kind of the year that Pallbearer like really took off, and that had sort of like provided this convenient escape for me for all of this time, because I never anticipated that I was suddenly going to be thrust into being a professional musician who like spends a good portion of my time like kind of on the road and like, or at least on the move. Even if I'm not touring, I often would be like flying between New York and Little Rock to rehearse or like do whatever. I was just kind of like, I was always able to like have this like forward mobility that like enabled me to never really need to take a look back
Sure.
at how my mother's passing had been shaping me all that time in the interim. So
Mm-hmm.
knowing like last year, like when we like kind of like all agreed that we were going to start working on a new record, I was like, well, knowing that I'm going to be home for this long. I mean, obviously this was like pre-COVID, so I've had a lot of time at home. But I was like, all right, I need to like sit down and make a like fuller assessment of myself and like my relationship to my mother's death, and like how that has like shaped me in ways beyond what I had really comprehended before, because it was so easy for me to just keep moving forward
Sure. I
without
get where you're
having
coming
to
from. Yeah.
really like, yeah, without having to really look at it. I was able to just be like, well, I'm too busy for this. I can just kind of like brush it off or like block it out in a way that like
Mm.
it felt like it never caught up with me. But I knew that it was inevitable, and so I just decided to like basically do an about face and like just really try to like take it head on.
Yeah, I can relate in a way. I lost my dad 10 years ago too, and he lived in a different city, but it's very hard to articulate to somebody, particularly at our age, when you lose a parent at our age. My wife and I hadn't yet had kids, and my wife since lost her father too, so we've just got mothers on either side of the family. But it goes far beyond, from my own perspective, reviewing your own sense of mortality. It actually sort of lends itself into the quality of life that you want to lead and the legacy you want to lead, particularly as I do have kids.
Yeah.
Insofar as, okay, so my father and I wouldn't say we didn't get along, but we certainly were never close, and he made no effort to understand my deep love and appreciation of music like this. You know what I mean? He worked for the state government and basically turned up to work and then came home, that sort of a thing. And then he had an interest in some sport and stuff, and that's really kind of it. But it if anything, I think his mortality allowed me to consider very much the relationship that I want to have with my daughters and the kind of legacy I want to leave behind for them, because he had cancer and he died within sort of 2 years, I think it was, of his first diagnosis. So it was boom, just, and then that's it, gone. And if they didn't have some cash, he would have been dead as soon as he got the diagnosis, effectively, because it was brain
Yeah.
cancer, it was your cactus. Yeah, but it's something, and I think, I don't know whether it's from that. I'm not. Maybe it's always been a bit of a lifelong pursuit, but I lent into a lot of Krishna consciousness and tried to
Oh,
understand
interesting.
our place in the universe, in that way.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. for me, the roughest part of it was I grew up in like kind of the like, I guess like unusual, was raised under like sort of like unusual circumstances where like my parents were involved in a cult, and it was still like a Christian based thing, but it was like this like very fringe like Christian cult. And the way that like the structure of it was that like my mom was like kind of the only person that I ended up with that I really like looked to for guidance. My dad was like not really as present in my life. Mm-hmm. And then I lost my mom like right on the cusp of like really like becoming an adult. Sure. So it was like this like very intense sense of like feeling like unmoored at that time, where I was just like the one person that I like, for whatever reason, like my like parents like poor choices of like being involved in like such a like questionable thing, like I ended up where I like lost the one person that I had sort of looked to all through growing up as like my one sort of mentor and like confidant. Like she was like just pulled away like right at like this crux in my life where I was like, I felt like very directionless. And so I kind of like let Pallbearer be the thing that guided my direction, because it was like also like wildly you know, impossible to speculate about like what would happen, but I at least like had this thing that I could like pour all of my energy into. So
yeah, look, I understand exactly where you're coming from, because it certainly didn't happen at that moment when my father passed away, but a few years afterwards I finally went back to university and got a degree, and I don't know how else to say it, mate, but got serious. That's the only way I can say it. And when I say got serious about what I'm doing here and now, because like you, with you playing music, I think I'm sort of spread in performance, but in covers and stuff. That's just something I do, mm-hmm. But it then forms what I do here, which is the journalism pursuit, the music journalism pursuit. Now, writing the book, I'm writing a book at the moment, writing a book about a Krishna devotee, and also what I'm doing here, the podcast as well, and so many of the wonderful interview subjects, such as yourself, that I've interviewed over the years. I'll be sending the book to, and I and as I say, man, I think I just got serious. Before that, I was working my ass off in a telecommunications company as an account executive, and just dealing with fucking morons. And it takes so much of your soul and spirit to do that, if that's not what you're put here to do. You know, and I think that, and if there's any gift from it all, and I hope you don't mind me framing it that way, with our respective parents passing away, is that it allows us to focus, extraordinarily focus too, which I'm not sure that I would have done if my dad was still around.
Yeah. I mean, I have thought a lot about this, like even like in my like decade of running away, I mean, it's obviously been like an ever-present like thorn in my side, kind of, where I'm just like, I like still to this day like have a hard time dealing with this, but I'm also like, I would be in a completely different circumstance if none of that had happened. Mm-hmm. Like that was like the biggest driving force of starting this band at all, was that my mom was terminally ill and I needed an outlet to like communicate that musically, and like for many years like in a very like veiled sense in the lyrics. But yeah, this is just like it's taken me this long to really like understand like how deeply it has affected me, and to also like understand the like deeper complexity of like how much I don't understand.
Do you have a lot of dreams, really vivid dreams?
I have had a lot of vivid dreams over the years, and honestly, like that's been a big inspiration for a lot of the like imagery in the lyrics, but not on Forgotten Days. It's the first
Okay.
Pallbearer record where there's no like dream imagery in any of the lyrics that I wrote. It was like all like more concrete.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
have to let you know. Unfortunately, my phone is like I think only on like 7% or something.
7%.
So
That's
yeah,
all good.
me.
Well, I'll wrap things up, but before I do, look, I do host a podcast series, as I might have alluded to, mate. If you're comfortable, I know we've spoken about some pretty personal stuff, man, but if you're comfortable, I'll release it I'll release everything that we've spoken about on the podcast, because I think, man,
Sure.
I think if I've learned anything in this 4 year journey that I've been on by doing this, mate, is that heavy metal fans, mate, we're a sensitive bunch. You know, contrary to the perception out there by the mainstream, and we do connect with musicians on a much deeper level than just listening to the music. I think so. I think it's really important that people hear that. It's I don't want to use a word like inspired. You know, it's not appropriate to use a word like that. But these experiences that we've both had with losing a parent, you know, the consequences of some of that have manifested in our art, if you like. And I think it's
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
important for people to hear that, you know, and because a lot of again, men, I'm not making any broader assumptions about anybody listening and their life circumstances, mate. But life is tough, man. I mean, you guys have got a bloody election going up there in three weeks' time, and we know for a fact there's going to be a lot of social upheaval either way with that one there. And a lot of my listenership is in your part of the world, man. And you know, and I think we're witnessing very interesting times in the good old United States, which I think is a beautiful country, a great country. I've been there many times, but you know, it's not the country that it was when I was last there in 2012. I don't think,
Yeah,
and
I don't
I
even think
think,
it's the country that it was like a year ago. Right now,
oh,
there's never been a time. I don't think there's, at least in the entire time that I've been alive, I don't think there's ever been like a higher amount of social anxiety.
it's just
Like
this polarity,
there's
mate, that's happening. Like where people they're sort of going. I got to be honest, man. It seems to be more on the left. They're going so far left when centre left is okay. You can still express a lot of these leftist views through the centre left, but they're going so far left at the moment. I do get a bit concerned about the consequence for average families over there that are just trying to earn a living, and they work in, mum works in Walmart and dad works at a mortgage company or something, this sort of thing. And I'm not trying to pitch a political point here whatsoever, but I think as soon as average people who are driving their Pontiac Aztec around can't, or Chevrolet Lumina or whatever it might be around, feel unsafe, man, I think society has got very serious questions to ask themselves, and I think
yeah,
certainly the images that we're seeing here now is a bit of that.
yeah. I definitely think that. I mean, living in New York, I've seen a lot of the thing that's or things that are being portrayed in a very extreme way in the media, especially like earlier this year with a lot of the protests. Like it's been spun into something a little less beautiful than I think that it is. But also, I can only speak to what I've seen in my circumstance. I do agree that I think that like the left in general has become like very splintered, and there needs to be a little more unification and a little less finger pointing and like piety about like who can like be the like the it's gonna sound like very cliched, but like who can be like the most politically correct, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. And I think there's that.
I don't know. I am definitely a very left leaning person, but I also I hope that in the future that there would be less of this sort of like balkanizing of ideals in the left, because that's definitely not fucking happening on the other side of the aisle. Like there needs to be a little more of more of like, let's tackle these issues like one by one, and like instead of like we're just going to follow this thing and this, it's just kind of these like sort of like pie in the sky things that like each group is just like trying to take care of on their own without as much like consequence towards other stuff. I don't know. I'm not necessarily like the world's like most adept political philosophers. So that's just
you're
my
entitled
stance.
to your opinion, mate. Joseph, you're entitled to your opinion as much as anybody else there in the United States. You're an extraordinary musician. At least you're trying, mate. Fucking hell, man. At least you're creating this beautiful music for people that will help them through these times. I've said this many times on the podcast when I've had conversations with people such as yourself. I want to say thank you for doing what you're doing, because it is very important what you're doing. You know, we've got Daz and the guys in Benediction in the UK back. You know, I mean, we're going through a time where I think either way, whatever is going on out there in the public, in our own, you know, to centre ourselves, okay, for people like myself, you know, music is the elixir, it's the tonic, and the fact that you give a shit and you're still producing music and you're not going to give up doing that, man, I can't make that point, I can't labour that point enough, okay, that is extremely important that you keep doing what you're doing, you know, and that you don't give up doing what you're doing, because I think people now more than ever, because I don't think it's going to stop anytime soon, mate, this polarisation that's occurring over the next 10 years or so, mate, people they'll lean into Pallbearer and the lyrics that you're writing for the reasons that you've expressed, that you've written them especially, and they'll gain strength from them, mate. So thanks so much for doing what you've done, and, you know, good luck with everything, and, mate, I just hope to see you guys down here sometime in the not distant future, the near future. Let's say that. Let's be optimistic.
I really hope so. I really, really hope so.
All right, brother. Thanks so much for the conversation. Good luck with everything again.
Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Okay, catch ya.
Cheers.
You've been listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast series that syndicates for the A-List Online, and my name is Andrew Mackay-Smith. The interview subject then, his name is Rowland D. Howard from the outfit Pallbearer. Thanks so much for listening.